Welcome to True Crime Stories for English Learners, where real-life mysteries meet clear and simple English. The Bunker of Horror, Lutz Reinstrom. The woman stumbled toward the police station in Hamburg-Langenhorn on September 13, 1991. She had been missing for 7 days. Her name was Christa S., and she was 53 years old. When police officers saw her condition, they knew immediately something terrible had happened. She was traumatized, exhausted, and terrified, but she was alive, and she could talk. "There's a bunker," she told them, "under his house. He kept me there in chains. He showed me photographs. There are other women, dead women." What Christa described seemed impossible. A torture chamber beneath a family home in a quiet Hamburg suburb? Bodies dissolved in acid and buried in barrels? It sounded like a horror movie, not reality. But when police investigated, they discovered Christa was telling the truth, and the truth was more horrifying than anyone could have imagined. Lutz Reinstrom had been living a double life. To his neighbors, he was a friendly family man who ran a small fur business and loved hosting barbecues. But beneath his townhouse in Hamburg-Rahlstedt, he had built a secret bunker where he imprisoned, tortured, and murdered women. He would dissolve their bodies in hydrochloric acid and bury them in barrels, thinking no one would ever know. He had gotten away with it for years. This is the story of Germany's acid barrel murderer, a man who built a chamber of horrors under his family home and destroyed lives while maintaining a mask of suburban normalcy. The Man Next Door. Lutz Reinstrom was born on March 29, 1948, in Sassnitz on the island of Rügen, which at that time was part of East Germany. He grew up in the German Democratic Republic during the Cold War, in a society that was authoritarian and tightly controlled. After completing basic education, Lutz trained as a furrier, someone who works with animal pelts and makes fur coats and accessories. At some point, Lutz left East Germany and moved to Hamburg in West Germany. His mother had moved there years earlier after separating from his father. She had opened a small fur shop in 1956, and Lutz eventually took over the business. He married and had a daughter. By all external appearances, he was a normal working-class man trying to make a living and support his family. In the early 1980s, Lutz and his family moved into a townhouse at Dampfwaffenweg in Hamburg-Rahlstedt, a quiet suburban neighborhood in the northeast part of the city. The house was part of a row of similar homes with neighbors on either side. It seemed like a perfectly ordinary place for a perfectly ordinary family. Lutz's neighbors found him friendly and sociable. He enjoyed hosting barbecues in his garden and was known as an excellent storyteller who could keep people entertained for hours. He was popular in the neighborhood. He attended a local swimming club and seemed to enjoy an active social life. Nobody suspected that this pleasant family man was hiding a dark secret. But there were signs, if anyone had looked closely enough. Lutz had what would later be diagnosed as narcissistic personality disorder and paraphilia, specifically a form of sadistic sexual disorder that went far beyond consensual BDSM. He craved absolute power and control over others. He enjoyed causing pain and fear, and he was very, very good at hiding these desires behind a mask of normalcy. In 1983, Lutz told neighbors he was building an air raid shelter in his garden, a bunker to protect the family in case of nuclear war. This wasn't unusual in Cold War Germany, where fear of nuclear conflict was real and preparations were common. Neighbors thought nothing of it when construction began on Lutz's property. But Lutz wasn't building a shelter to protect his family. He was building a torture chamber. The bunker had thick concrete walls that would contain sound. It had a small entrance, just 80 by 80 centimeters, hidden so well that even if someone searched the property, they might not find it. Inside was a room with an iron bed frame, chains, handcuffs, and a hook in the ceiling. There were no windows, no escape. It was designed to hold prisoners, and that's exactly what Lutz planned to use it for. The first victim, Hildegard K. On March 12, 1986, Hildegard K., a 61-year-old woman, disappeared from her home in Hamburg. Hildegard was the wife of Kurt K., a master furrier who had been Lutz's vocational teacher and former employer. Lutz knew the couple well. Hildegard had no reason to fear him. Lutz abducted Hildegard and brought her to his bunker. There, he held her captive, chained and helpless. He tortured her, using clamps and other tools to inflict pain. His motives were both sadistic and financial. He forced Hildegard to reveal where she kept money and valuables. He stole approximately 20,000 to 40,000 Deutschmarks, German currency at the time, and her jewelry. He made her write letters to her family suggesting she had left her husband voluntarily. For about a week, Hildegard suffered in that underground chamber while Lutz's wife and daughter lived their normal lives in the house above, completely unaware of what was happening beneath their feet. The bunker was soundproofed. Hildegard's screams couldn't be heard. Eventually, Hildegard died, whether from the torture, starvation, or because Lutz strangled her. The exact cause remains unclear. What is certain is that Lutz killed her. Then he dismembered her body. He placed the pieces in a large barrel and poured hydrochloric acid over them. The acid would dissolve the soft tissue, making identification difficult. Lutz buried the barrel 2 meters deep in his garden at the Dom Pfaffenweg property and covered it with concrete. When Hildegard's family reported her missing, police investigated. They found the letters she had written suggesting she was leaving her husband. The investigation stalled. Kurt K. and his family suffered for years, not knowing what had really happened to Hildegard, holding on to hope that maybe she was still alive somewhere. Meanwhile, Lutz continued his normal life. He went to work at his fur shop. He attended swimming club meetings. He hosted barbecues. He was the friendly neighbor, the devoted family man. No one suspected that he had murdered someone and buried her in his garden. The second victim, Annegret B. 2 years later, on October 5, 1988, Lutz struck again. This time, his victim was Annegret B., a 31-year-old industrial clerk. Annegret was also a member of Lutz's swimming club. They knew each other from social gatherings. Lutz had even briefly dated Annegret. She trusted him. Lutz abducted Annegret and brought her to his bunker. This time, the captivity lasted even longer, more than 4 weeks. For over a month, Annegret was held prisoner beneath Lutz's house, suffering terrible torture and sexual abuse. Lutz photographed her, Polaroid pictures showing her naked, bound, with her head shaved. These photographs were not just souvenirs, they were part of the torture, a way to humiliate and dehumanize his victim. Eventually, Annegret died. Whether she succumbed to the injuries and starvation or was directly killed by Lutz is unclear, but her death was certainly caused by him. Lutz disposed of her body the same way he had disposed of Hildegard's: dismemberment, acid, and burial in a barrel. This time, however, Lutz didn't bury the barrel at his Rahlstedt property. He had a weekend property in Basedow in the Herzogtum Lauenburg area. Neighbors there later reported seeing Lutz digging a deep pit on his property around the time of Annegret's disappearance. He buried her barrel there. When Annegret was reported missing, police investigated. They interviewed people who knew her, including Lutz. Annegret's mother even specifically mentioned Lutz to police as someone who might have information. But when police questioned him, Lutz was convincing. He claimed to know nothing. The police officer who interviewed him actually knew Lutz personally from the swimming club, which may have made the officer less suspicious. The investigation went nowhere. Tragically, at the time of this police questioning, Annegret was probably still alive in Lutz's bunker. If the investigation had been more thorough, if police had searched Lutz's property, she might have been saved. But they didn't, and she wasn't. This failure would haunt the investigators who later worked on the case. For Lutz, successfully fooling the police must have reinforced his sense of superiority. He had gotten away with it twice. He was smarter than everyone else. He could do anything he wanted. This dangerous combination of sadistic desires and narcissistic confidence would lead him to attempt a third abduction. The survivor, Krista S. By 1991, Kurt K., the husband of Lutz's first victim, Hildegard, had a new partner. Her name was Krista S., and she was 53 years old. Lutz, obsessed with control and still fixated on Kurt K., decided to target Krista. On September 6, 1991, Lutz abducted Krista. He attacked her with a stun gun, a device that delivers an electric shock, incapacitating the victim. He forced her into her own car and drove her to his house in Ralstead. Then he dragged her into his bunker. Once again, Lutz had a woman chained in his torture chamber. He showed Krista the degrading photographs he had taken of Annegret B., pictures of a naked woman with a shaved head, bound and terrified. This was psychological torture, showing Krista what her fate might be. But this time, Lutz had a different plan. He wasn't just indulging his sadistic desires, he was also attempting extortion. He demanded 300,000 Deutschemarks in ransom from Kurt K. The abduction was both a continuation of Lutz's pattern of sadistic violence and an attempt to get money. For 7 days, Krista was held captive. Lutz made ransom calls to Kurt K., trying to arrange a money handover. But the plan was falling apart. The money transfer was taking longer than expected, and critically, Lutz's wife was returning early from vacation. She would be back at the house soon. Lutz panicked. If his wife came home while Krista was in the bunker, there was a risk of discovery. He decided to abandon his extortion plan. On September 13th, he put Krista back in her car, drove her to Hamburg-Langenhorn, and dropped her off in front of a police station. Then he drove away, apparently believing Krista wouldn't be able to identify him or wouldn't go to police. But Lutz had made a critical mistake. Unlike his previous victims, Krista had survived, and she could talk. The investigation began. Krista S. told police everything. She described the bunker, the torture, the photographs of another victim. She described her captor. Police quickly began investigating, and their attention focused on Lutz Reinstrom. Phone records from the ransom calls were traced. A trap had been set up to track the calls, and they led to Lutz. On September 17, 1991, just 4 days after releasing Krista, Lutz was arrested at his home in Hamburg-Ralstedt. Initially, Lutz was charged only with Krista's kidnapping, the extortion, the false imprisonment, the assault. In May 1992, he was convicted and sentenced to 3 years in prison for these crimes. But police suspected there was more to the story. Those photographs Lutz had shown Krista, the ones showing another woman. Who was she? Where was she? Police began a more thorough investigation. Detective Cornelia Atzeroth-Freyer became convinced that Lutz was responsible for missing persons cases. She faced resistance from her superiors, who were skeptical, but she persisted. She pushed for the creation of a special investigative unit to look into Lutz's possible connection to the disappearances of Hildegard K. and Annegret B. Investigators discovered that Lutz had rented a garage where they found numerous items belonging to Annegret B., including a sofa she had ordered shortly before her disappearance. They found that Lutz had sold Annegret's car. These discoveries provided grounds for more extensive searches. In November 1992, police searched Lutz's properties, both the Rallstedt house and the weekend property in Basedow. They brought cadaver dogs, specially trained animals that can detect the scent of decomposing bodies. At the Dampfwaffenweg house in Rallstedt, they discovered the bunker, the hidden entrance, the torture chamber, the equipment for inflicting pain. Everything Christa had described was real. On November 21st, they found 5 canisters of hydrochloric acid on the property. At the Basedow property, the dogs indicated the presence of remains, but initially nothing was found. Neighbors reported that Lutz had dug a deep pit there around the time of Annegret's disappearance. On December 1st, 1992, police using heavy equipment uncovered a barrel containing human remains dissolved in acid. It was Annegret B. Confronted with this discovery, Lutz confessed to burying another barrel at his Dampfwaffenweg property in Rallstedt. On December 4, 1992, police recovered a second barrel. This one contained the remains of Hildegard K., buried in the garden where Lutz had hosted barbecues, where his daughter had played, where neighbors had gathered for friendly social events. The trial and conviction. The main trial began on January 10, 1995, before a jury court under presiding judge Gerhard Schaffberg. The charges were double murder, Hildegard K. and Annegret B., plus the earlier conviction for kidnapping and extorting Christa S. The evidence was overwhelming. The bodies had been recovered. Forensic analysis confirmed the identities of the victims through DNA and dental records. Items belonging to the victims were found in Lutz's possession. Bank records showed that approximately 20,000 Deutsche Marks stolen from Hildegard K. had been deposited into Lutz's account. Hildegard's jewelry was found in his safe. Most importantly, Christa S. testified. She described her week in the bunker, the torture, the photographs Lutz had shown her, his demands for ransom. Her testimony brought the horrors of Lutz's crimes into stark reality for the jury. Detective Atzeroth Fryer also testified, describing the investigation and how her persistence had finally uncovered the truth. Without her refusal to give up, Lutz's crimes might never have been fully exposed. On May 22, 1996, the verdict was delivered, guilty on all counts. Lutz Reinstrom was sentenced to life imprisonment plus preventive detention, Sicherungsverwahrung, a special status in German law that allows continued confinement of dangerous criminals even after their sentence is completed. He would never be free again. Understanding the monster. During the trial and subsequent psychiatric evaluations, experts analyzed Lutz's psychology. Professor Hans-Jürgen Horn, a Hamburg psychiatrist, diagnosed him with narcissistic personality disorder and paraphilia, specifically a pathological form of sadomasochism that had nothing to do with consensual BDSM and everything to do with enjoying the infliction of genuine suffering on helpless victims. Lutz craved absolute power and control. His victims were completely at his mercy, and this satisfied his deepest psychological needs. The sadistic torture wasn't just about sexual gratification, it was about domination, about being godlike in his power over life and death. Lutz's double life was facilitated by his ability to compartmentalize. He could be the friendly neighbor hosting barbecues while simultaneously being the sadistic torturer in the bunker. These two personas existed separately in his mind, allowing him to function normally in society while committing horrific crimes. His choice of victims was calculated. He targeted women he knew, women who trusted him. Hildegard was the wife of his former teacher. Annegret was a swimming club acquaintance he had dated. Krista was connected to Kurt K. These weren't random strangers, these were people within his social circle. This betrayal of trust made his crimes even more horrific. The elaborate planning that went into building the bunker, acquiring the acid, and disposing of the bodies showed that Lutz's crimes were not impulsive acts of passion. They were premeditated, calculated, and methodical. He thought he was smart enough to commit the perfect crimes, and for years, he was right. The double life. One of the most disturbing aspects of the Lutz Reinstrom case is how he maintained his double life. His wife and daughter lived in the house above the bunker. They had no idea what was happening beneath them. The bunker was soundproofed, and the entrance was hidden. Lutz's wife never questioned why he spent time in the basement or the garden. This raises troubling questions. How could Lutz's wife not notice anything? The answer likely involves a combination of factors: Lutz's skill at deception, his wife's trust in him, and perhaps a willingness not to ask too many questions. German legal authorities investigated whether she had any knowledge of the crimes, but found no evidence of her involvement or awareness. Neighbors saw nothing suspicious. When police dug up the garden and found barrels of human remains, neighbors were shocked. Lutz had been such a friendly, normal-seeming man. He had hosted them at barbecues on the same ground where bodies were buried. The cognitive dissonance was overwhelming. This case demonstrates that serial killers don't always fit stereotypes. They're not always obviously strange or antisocial. Lutz Reinstrom was married with a child, ran a business, had friends and social connections. He seemed normal, because in many ways he was skilled at performing normalcy. The monster was hidden behind a mask of suburban respectability. The victims remembered. Hildegard K. was 61 years old when she was murdered. She was a wife, probably a mother and grandmother. She trusted someone she knew, and that trust cost her life. Her husband Kurt and her family suffered for years not knowing what happened to her. When her remains were finally found, at least they had answers. But the manner of her death was horrifying. Annegret B. was just 31 years old. She had her whole life ahead of her. She was working as an industrial clerk, enjoying social activities like the swimming club. She briefly dated Lutz, which suggests she saw him as a normal potential partner. She could never have imagined what he truly was. Her suffering during those 4 weeks of captivity is almost impossible to comprehend. Krista S. survived, but she will carry the trauma of her experience for the rest of her life. She spent a week in that bunker, saw the photographs of Annegret's torture, and knew she might suffer the same fate. Her survival and her bravery in testifying helped ensure Lutz would be imprisoned forever. But the psychological scars remain. These women deserve to be remembered as people, not just as Lutz Reinstrom's victims. They had lives, personalities, hopes, and dreams. They deserved so much better than what happened to them. Justice and imprisonment. Lutz Reinstrom has been in prison continuously since his arrest on September 17, 1991. He is currently serving his life sentence in a high-security prison in Hamburg. Due to the preventative detention order, he will likely never be released. German law allows for life sentences with the possibility of parole after 15 years, but in cases with preventative detention, the person can be held indefinitely if they remain a danger to society. Lutz will almost certainly die in prison. He is now in his mid-70s. He has spent over 30 years imprisoned, and he will likely spend whatever years remain to him behind bars. This is appropriate given the nature of his crimes. In prison, Lutz has given some interviews, though details are limited. Like many narcissistic criminals, he seems more concerned with how he is perceived than with the suffering he caused. There is no indication he has ever shown genuine remorse for what he did to Hildegard, Annegret, and Christa. The case has been featured in German true crime documentaries and was the inspiration for a German TV series called Gefesselt, Deadlock, that aired in 2023. The series changed names but told a story closely based on Reinstrom's crimes. This media attention keeps the case in public consciousness, serving as a reminder of the dangers that can lurk behind friendly facades. Lessons from the case. The Lutz Reinstrom case offers several important lessons about crime, investigation, and society. First, trust your instincts about missing persons. When Annegret's mother told police that Lutz might have information, they should have investigated more thoroughly. The police officer who knew Lutz socially may have been too quick to accept his denials. If they had searched his property at that time, Annegret might have been found alive. Second, persistence in investigation matters. Detective Otzeroth Fryer faced resistance from her superiors but kept pushing for a thorough investigation. Her determination directly led to the discovery of the crimes and the recovery of the victims' remains. Sometimes one dedicated investigator can make all the difference. Third, appearances can be deeply deceiving. Lutz Reinstrom seemed like a normal, friendly family man. This case is a stark reminder that we cannot always tell who is dangerous based on surface-level impressions. Some of the most dangerous people are skilled at seeming normal. Fourth, victims of serial criminals are often people who knew and trusted the perpetrator. Random stranger danger gets a lot of attention, but many violent crimes are committed by people the victim knew. Lutz specifically targeted women within his social circle who had reason to trust him. Finally, the case highlights the importance of thorough police work and not making assumptions. Early investigations into Hildegard's and Annegret's disappearances didn't push hard enough. Letters suggesting voluntary departure were accepted too easily. More aggressive investigation might have stopped Lutz sooner. The German context. The Reinstrom case occurred in Germany and reflects some aspects of German society and criminal justice. The careful, methodical police investigation that eventually uncovered the truth is characteristic of German law enforcement's reputation for thoroughness. The extensive forensic analysis and patient building of the case showed German criminal justice at its best. The case also occurred in a specific historical context. Lutz was from East Germany originally and moved to Hamburg in the West. The divided Germany of the Cold War era, with its emphasis on conformity and surveillance in the East, may have influenced his psychology, though this is speculative. Many people from East Germany integrated normally into West German society without becoming criminals. German media coverage of the case was extensive, but generally more restrained than what might occur in British or American media. German journalism tends toward more factual, less sensationalistic reporting of crimes. The focus remained on the investigation, the victims, and the legal proceedings, rather than turning Lutz into a celebrity criminal. The legal outcome, life imprisonment with preventive detention, reflects German criminal justice priorities. Germany doesn't have the death penalty, but it does have mechanisms to ensure that the most dangerous criminals remain imprisoned even beyond their initial sentences. This serves the goal of public safety while avoiding execution. Unanswered questions. Despite the successful prosecution and conviction, some questions about the Reinstrom case remain unanswered. Were there other victims? Lutz killed at least 2 women and imprisoned a third who survived. But did he commit other crimes that were never discovered? Some investigators believe there may have been earlier victims whose bodies were never found. The sophistication of his methods suggests experience. It's possible the 2 known murders were not his first. When did Lutz's sadistic desires begin? Was Lutz always capable of such terrible violence, or did something trigger his evolution into a killer? Without his cooperation, and narcissistic criminals rarely provide genuine insight, we can only speculate about the development of his pathology. What did his family really know? His wife and daughter have maintained they knew nothing about the bunker or the crimes. The investigation supported this claim, but it remains difficult for many people to understand how Lutz could build and use a torture chamber under his family home without anyone suspecting anything. How many times did he come close to being caught before Krista survived? Were there other moments when police might have discovered his crimes if they had looked a little harder or been a little more suspicious? These questions will likely never be fully answered. Lutz has no incentive to reveal the full truth, and physical evidence can only tell us so much about crimes that occurred decades ago. A legacy of fear and awareness. The Lutz-Reinstrom case left a lasting impact on Germany, particularly in Hamburg. The idea that such terrible crimes could occur in an ordinary suburban neighborhood shattered people's sense of security. The bunker beneath the family home became a symbol of hidden evil lurking beneath apparent normalcy. For the Hamburg-Rahlstedt neighborhood where Lutz lived, the case was traumatic. Neighbors had to confront the fact that they had known a killer, had attended his barbecues, had chatted with him while bodies were buried in his garden. The townhouse where the crimes occurred became a place of horror, a constant reminder of what had happened there. The case also raised awareness about missing persons investigations in Germany. The failures in the early investigations of Hildegard's and Annegret's disappearances led to discussions about how police handle such cases. There was increased recognition that disappearances should be taken seriously and investigated thoroughly, even when there are letters or messages suggesting voluntary departure. The case demonstrated the importance of listening to survivors. Krista S.'s testimony was crucial not only for prosecuting the kidnapping charge, but also for uncovering the murders. Her bravery in speaking about her ordeal helped ensure justice for Hildegard and Annegret. Final thoughts. Lutz Reinstrom built a torture chamber beneath his family home and used it to imprison, torture, and murder women. He dissolved their bodies in acid and buried them in barrels. He lived a double life, seeming normal to neighbors and family while committing unspeakable crimes. He got away with it for years because he was careful, because he chose vulnerable moments to strike, and because early investigations failed to look deep enough. But Lutz made mistakes. He released Krista S. instead of killing her, perhaps thinking she wouldn't or couldn't identify him. He kept incriminating evidence, the photographs, the victim's possessions. He buried bodies on his own property where they could eventually be found. And perhaps his greatest mistake was underestimating the determination of Detective Atzeroth Fryer, who refused to give up on solving the missing persons cases. Today, Lutz Reinstrom remains in prison where he belongs. He is an old man now, serving a life sentence for unforgivable crimes. He will almost certainly die in prison, never again free to walk the streets of Hamburg or any other place. The bunker has been sealed. The townhouse where it existed has been torn down or renovated beyond recognition. The physical evidence of Lutz's crimes has been largely erased, but the memory remains of the women who suffered and died, of the survivor who escaped and testified, of the investigators who persisted until justice was done. The case of Lutz Reinstrom serves as a reminder that evil can hide behind the most ordinary faces. The friendly neighbor, the family man, the person who makes you laugh at barbecues. Any of these could potentially be hiding terrible secrets. This isn't a reason to be paranoid or distrustful of everyone, but it is a reason to take warning signs seriously, to trust our instincts when something feels wrong, and to investigate thoroughly when people disappear. Hildegard K. and Annegret B. deserved better. They deserved to live full lives, to be safe, to not have their trust betrayed by someone who seemed friendly but was actually a monster. We remember them not as Lutz Reinstrom's victims, but as people who mattered, whose lives had value, whose losses left real holes in the world. And we remember that justice, though sometimes slow, can eventually arrive. Lutz Reinstrom thought he was too smart to be caught. He thought his bunker was undetectable, his acid disposal foolproof, his double life sustainable. He was wrong. The truth came out. The bodies were found. And now he will spend the rest of his life paying for what he did, locked in a prison cell that is no doubt more comfortable than the bunker where he imprisoned his victims, but is still a prison nonetheless. The friendly neighbor from Hamburg-Rahlstedt is gone. Only the prisoner remains, and that is justice. Another dark chapter closed, but the mystery of human nature continues. Thanks for listening to True Crime Stories for English Learners. Don't forget to subscribe and join me next time for another real story that's stranger than fiction.